The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening and welcome to Revolution Radio. We're now live on air. Sorry for the delay in coming on air. I've had a few problems getting onto Studio A, but welcome to the Divine Truth on Revolution Radio, and we should have my co-host Nyssa. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
And my guest this evening, Michael Horn.
Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. Hi.
How are you? Sorry for the technical problems, but the show tonight is going to be about a subject I've followed for a number of years, the Billy Meier case. And I did a lot of research into this a few years ago, and I came to my own conclusions about it. But the thing that sort of fascinates me about this case is why it's not as well known as a lot of other cases that have much less evidence to back them up. I mean, I think the Billy Meier case has got more evidence than most of the other cases put together. So I wanted to ask you, Michael. Oh, it's a bit of an echo here. Can you guys hear an echo?
Yes.
Michael, there's a bit of an echo. Oh, it's gone away now.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Michael, why do you think the Billy Meier case is not as prominently known as a lot of other UFO and UFO cases? And why it's not, I guess, I don't like to say it, but why it's not taken as seriously as a lot of other UFO cases?
Well, because I'm going to give you the bottom line answer, which is because it's real, it's still ongoing, and not any of the other cases are. In other words, truly, I am unaware of any other actual proven, let alone still ongoing UFO contact case in all of ufology. Are there claims? Yes, of course. There's no shortage of them, but there's a fundamental reason why these difficulties are upon us in regards to the Meier case. And I've started to put it in these terms. The confirmed existence of real intelligent space traveling extraterrestrial life would be the single most important discovery in all of human history. I think we might agree on that.
Yes.
But right?
Yeah.
But it would be exceeded only by the confirmed contact with that life. So it would be one thing for us to scientifically say, well, there is an extraterrestrial civilization, or we've been able to tell somehow that some of the things we see in the sky are of extraterrestrial manufacture and origin, which of course has not officially been done yet, despite all of the noise in the so-called UFO community. But imagine if that had been accomplished, that would be historical. And then if we had contact with such a race, if that was established and proven, that would be the most significant development in all of human history that we know about. Now, the Meier case has been suppressed, and the entire topic of UFOs has been trivialized and turned into not only entertainment in movies and films and things, but the entire field is flooded with claims and supposed photos and films and you name it. Well, why would that be the case, and what then, and the Meier material not brought forward? Because it is not in the interests of any of the organizations, entities, mechanisms of control in our world. That means the military, political, religious, or economic institutions in our world would not benefit at all from the admission and recognition of intelligent life that could operate outside of any constraints that we would try to put on it. That would create, in their minds, of course, not only loss of control as the authorities, experts, and leaders of our world in their respective fields, but it would mean that multitudes of people, would probably go a bit crazy.
Mhm.
And that's their assessment. So the UFO community, the UFO industry is not only allowed to thrive, it is supported through the intelligence agencies with ample amounts of disinformation, which is now, it has now taken on a life of its own, where every slightly daft person gives themselves credentials and makes up names of imaginary extraterrestrials and what have you. And now they're channeling ETs and space brothers, and they're meeting with extra. And not one of these people has produced one piece of examinable, let alone verifiable evidence. But Taj, as you mentioned, Billy Meier has produced the abundance of evidence that would, easily eclipse the combined non-evidence of all these other
Yeah.
questions.
And a lot of the evidence that he's produced it can't be faked, because these are like films that were taken back in the 50s and the 60s, where before we had, CGI and all this kind of technology that we have today or even Photoshop and stuff like that. So a lot of the photographs that were taken, I believe they all have been authenticated, haven't they? A lot of the photographs have been authenticated.
There was one photo which will stick in people's minds that there was controversy about, but he did, as I researched it, he did actually claim that the original was taken, and the one that he came back was actually had been tampered with, and the original had been the photo of one of the female.
Right.
But that wasn't the photo that he took. They'd actually, because you got to understand that he's going to be tried to be discredited at every opportunity, and when he sent the photos off to be processed, because we're going back now to when you had to hand over. The millennials won't understand this concept, but we did actually have. They won't understand. This is pre-Google time, that we had rolls of film and we had to give them to a photo booth or to a shop, and we would trust them to develop our film for us. And in that process, obviously, he claimed he was infiltrated, and the photos that he received back that had been processed for him wasn't the one that he'd originally given. And that is the one which can be seen as it's a photo taken from a still from a movie or a film. Right. You'd know more about it than me, but it was the female that he had contact with, and although it did look extremely similar to the female he had contact with, which of course made it more successful as discrediting him, but it wasn't the original. It wasn't what he sent off. It had been tampered with during the process, but this is a process which is decades old, and young people today are not going to understand that process at all.
Well, let me tell you that you just hit on something that you've hit on several things which actually are core to the case and in and of themselves completely establish immediately the credibility. And let me go back over some of what was said by both of you. It was mentioned that Meier took some photos and all back in the 60s. Now, what happened was Billy Meier took photos in the 1960s, 1964 to be precise, is when he showed them. And he had taken 80 photos of UFOs, and he was in the outskirts of Delhi, India, in the middle of nowhere. And he was interviewed by a very highly respected reporter for a very credible newspaper, which at the time had already been in existence itself for over 100 years. Now, we have that. We have all this documentation. So this is not a matter of anybody has to wonder and guess. So let me walk everybody through it for a moment. In that 1964 newspaper article, the reporter describes looking at this photo album, and he describes a number of those photos, which we still have to this day. The same photos taken 53 years ago. Now, here's an ingredient that just has recently been added to the case and pertains exactly to this. Earlier this year, I was contacted by a guy named Joe, an American expatriate who is living in another country. And he said, hey, you know, I have been in my life a professional investigator, and I came upon the Billy Meier case, and I'm not so sure, maybe this is a hoax. And so we spoke over a period of a couple months. And then, you know, he just wasn't satisfied with some answers, and he disappeared for a while. Within the last 8 weeks, Joe reappeared, and he reappeared this way. Hi, Michael, it's me, Joe. Are you still willing to talk to me? I said, well, of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? He said, well, you know, we had a little bit of a contentious exchange. I said, that's not a problem for me. You're interested in finding out the truth. That's all that matters. And he says, well, now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me and about your Billy Meier case. And I said, well, okay. He said, I was the top case supervisor for what's known as the OSI. That's the Office of Special Investigation for the U.S. Air Force. And that was between the years of about 1967, 1971, thereabouts. He said, I personally supervised and investigated over 2,000 cases, and that included presidential candidates, military people, government people who had to be vetted thoroughly because they would be privy to state secrets, national security. Some might have their fingers on a nuclear trigger, you know, presidential presidents and all that. And he said, so I know what I'm talking about, and I just want you to listen to what I'm going to tell you now. Your Billy Meier case is 100% ironclad authentic, and it starts and ends really with the 1964 India evidence. And he said, look, if somebody can't come forward who's a skeptic, who wants to attack the case and show where this man obtains 80 UFO photographs in India in 1964, and also there's a young girl at the time who's the daughter of a monk where this man Billy Meier is studying Buddhism, and this woman comes forward 30 years after that publicly. And this guy Joe says to me, and I was able to finally corroborate what you claimed. She indeed was the representative, the diplomat from Cambodia, representative to the UN for a dozen years. And these things, unless they can be shown to be false, that case is solid and authentic right from there. Everything beyond that, there's no reason why the man would have to hoax anything. It's obviously true, and you should be shouting it from the rooftops. Now, that's the India thing, and that is, as we can always refer back, that's the end-all and be-all. You add everything else into it. And of course, there, as I said, there isn't anybody out there claiming anything in the UFO world that has anything authentic and can compare. But you just mentioned, my dear, about the Ascot photographs, the controversial Ascot and Nyssa photographs that skeptics said, well, these are merely photographs of two dancers from a Dean Martin television show. Now, I have a page on my website where we convincingly rebut that, because it is, as you said, where there was not one photograph or roll of film that Meier ever developed himself. They had to be sent out, and they were then vulnerable to be intercepted by CIA and other parties and manipulated. Here's the thing about those photographs. First of all, the claim that he would have photographed those faces off a TV set is right away not true. Nobody's ever established that that show was broadcast in Switzerland, and certainly without German subtitles, because none appear in the photographs, that Meier had access to a color TV at that time, that he knew the show would have been shown, that he had a camera that he was ready to photograph it when that woman, I mean, there's 10 circumstances alone that nobody's ever established. But here's the kicker. And not only In 1975 or 76, Meier was told that Asket and Nyssa had doubles, two women in America in the entertainment industry that were almost exact doubles for Asket and Nyssa. Now, it sounds crazy, but it's in the documents that were published before there was ever any question about it, because I had those documents in books, and many people do, and it's copyrighted. Okay, so it gets a little better. The Plejaran extraterrestrials that he's working with because he's told that there are these doubles, and he wants to go see them and all this, look in and what have you. And they said, no, we're leaving that alone for other reasons. The Plejaran knew that he was eventually going to be, people are going to call him a hoaxer. So in about February or March of this year, now this is a long story, but here's how complicated the Meier case is, because it's just full of incontrovertible evidence and wonderful stuff. In February, March of this year, I got a phone call from a woman in New York. She wanted to know if I would be willing to speak with her and her friend in a conference call, and I said I would. It turns out that her friend is Michelle Delafave, who is the woman who looks like Asket, and they were asking if they could go to Switzerland to meet Billy Meier, because they both know that he's not a hoaxer. They know that he's an honest person, and they just want to meet him. Well, I told them that it was probably not terribly likely, because he's 80 years old, he's had a heart valve replacement, et cetera, but I am going to ask on their behalf. And it turned out that Billy said, I'm going to make an exception in this case because of, this woman, Michelle. She's the one that the controversy was around. And indeed, they went to Switzerland. And what I'm going to try to do, just for your own benefit here, I'm going to send you a link to a video that's on YouTube that they recorded of their meeting with him and one of Meier's friends, Christian Freiner, who answered questions and all of that. So anything in the Meier case, people come forward and they try to claim, this is a hoax. It is so solid, and that's why it's suppressed, because it's real.
And also because it's not negative either, because they seem to promote the negative ET fractions and ideas, whereas Billy Meier said that there wasn't any negative ETs, that it was all to help us if we were the negative ETs, but that it was all like aimed to help us, kind of thing. And that doesn't help the military complex when they want to employ weapons in space and all that kind of agenda.
Right. As a matter of fact, just to throw it in there may be, because the universe is a big place, there are good and bad everywhere. But the people that Meier's in contact with, clearly there's no hostility, because for more than 75 years, since he's a 5-year-old boy, they've been meeting with him. If they'd wanted to do anything harmful to our world, they would have done it long before we even had nuclear weapons. So, long ago.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we had a show a few months ago with Mary Rodwell, and she explained that about 80% of so-called contactee abductions are positive encounters, and they are barely, maybe 15-20% are negative encounters.
I'd like to throw in a thought about that, because here's the thing, my friends. We are now in the times that the Plejaran, these ETs, and Meier have been warning about since the 40s and 50s, specifically about the events that would be coming during these times if humankind did not change its direction. Part of the information in the case then is very specific prophetic and predictive information. We can no longer change certain things because people wouldn't listen. They suppressed the information, the military. There have been 23 attempts on Billy's life. It's pretty brutal. Here's another thing, and I just put it out as information from this side, and people are free to accept, reject anything they want. It's fine. Just, if we do our own thinking. Here's the shocker for the UFO community. There are effectively 0 extraterrestrial abductions. When real abductions take place, they are secret military. In our past history, there have probably been something like 5 or 6 actual so-called abductions or contact examinations by extraterrestrials. The rest of this is part of the agenda to keep people fearful, to keep them, or if they have wonderful experience, it's to keep people away from this material.
Yeah.
So, you know, people all over, I know there are people all over the world, and they talk about abductions and experiencers and all. I tried to explain this some time ago to some people who were, you know, coming at me about abductions. And I said, look, let's just assume for a moment that there's extraterrestrials in their craft and that they come from hundreds or millions of light years away. These are, by definition, through their evolution, they must be highly advanced. They must be very long-lived, because in the process of developing space travel, you have to be able to live long enough to go through the preliminary stages. Before you're able to go light speed, you're going to be in a craft for 20 years, 40 years, 100 years. So you've got to have the long enough life. So these are beings that are already technologically and in terms of spiritual or consciousness development far beyond us. So what sense does it make that some beings have come from 100 light years away and they've decided to float Aunt Edna through the walls and Uncle Joe because they're going to abduct them and take their very precious genetic material, or whatever other stories we hear? Our genetic material, nobody wants. We have an average lifespan in the 70s and 80s. A small percentage of people get into the hundreds. You're talking about people with hundreds, if not thousands of years of lifespan. High technology development. They can make stuff themselves in their own worlds through their sciences. But we're supposed to believe that they're coming here and abducting us. Oh, they need our emotions. Really? They need to be crazy, violent, aggressive lunatics? I don't think so. Oh, they're going to work with the American government. Oh, why? What beings in the universe want to come here and cooperate with the U.S. military and its government, which is the most aggressive, terroristic on the face of the planet, responsible for stirring up war and terrorism everywhere, and giving rise to things that are now coming back all over the world to everybody? Really, extraterrestrials? So I know it's not a popular thing to say. And I know for many of the people in all these groups, and believe me, I've heard from many, there are a lot of people that are not happy with the way I represent the Meier case, but all we're talking about is let's find the truth. I have a video on my channel where I interviewed a guy I met up here in Flagstaff who knew nothing about the Billy Meier case, but he was a former military guy who also worked in special secret weapons development at Dulce Air Force. But you know, it's supposed to be just full of extraterrestrials, right? So this guy, whose name is also Joe, and I've got the video online, I'll send you links and stuff if you like. He said that he had been at Dulce and he was watching these craft overhead that were making right angle turns and doing stuff. And he said to his supervisor, "What the heck are those?" And the guy says, "Oh, those are drones." And he said, no, those aren't drones. I know drones. I fly drones. When these things go over my head, my hair is literally standing up. There's electromagnetism. So he was watching the testing of secret American military craft. And I asked him, well, what about abductions? He said, look, I was an Army Ranger. If we wanted to go into a neighborhood at night, everything's quiet, we could sneak up to a home, make sure everybody was asleep. We could pump a gas into the home that would put everybody completely out. We could come in with masks and we could pick a person or two. We could manipulate their memories. We could change things in the house. And in the morning they wake up and they're remembering extraterrestrials abducting them. And it's a big laugh. There's no extraterrestrials, and there's certainly none at Dulce and all the rest of this. So this will not sit well with people who get all fascinated and chase after all of this utter nonsense in the UFO world. And I say that because we are now seeing, here in America, as you know, we've just had the terrible hurricane in Texas, the one that's currently bombarding Florida and it's going to hit Georgia. We have earthquakes that are now going up 7s and 8s. All of this was foretold. And we're in it, and it's not going to stop now. It's going to be, it's going to be like a pinball machine around the planet because we didn't listen.
Right, yeah. I think from my own interviews and research, I think the most negative abductions are what we call my labs or military abductions. I don't think there are any negative actual alien abductions at all, because there would be no, like you've already explained, there would be no reason for aliens to abduct us. So, I mean, how long have you been looking into the Billy Meier case, Michael?
Actually, it's 38 years. I walked into a bookstore in 1979 and I saw his first photo book on all of this. And right away I said, wow, that looks real, because it didn't look like sci-fi. These are clear photos of objects in the skies in the 1970s. And nobody knows from a computer in 1979. There's no, as you say, no CGI, no Photoshop. And, the book was showing some of the testing that had been done and other evidence in the case and the man himself and snippets of the conversations. And it's just like, my gosh. And so that got me involved in it. And I didn't really find other evidence until it was roughly 7 years later, 1986, when I met a person who had 1,800 pages of these transcripts of the first 3 years of the published transcripts that had been translated into English. And that got me going. And then I read those for many months, and they were a little difficult to read because of the quality of English. But a couple of years after I had them, I opened up a newspaper, and there was a new scientific discovery about the connection of A-bombs to the ozone damage. And as I'm reading it, I'm going, well, wait a minute, how come I know this? I reached under the bed, I pulled out the first 100-page binder, and there was the information from 1975, also referencing back to what Meier knew in 1951 about this connection to the ozone damage. And then it hit me like a bolt. I thought, this is about far more than UFOs. And that's what got me to research and corroborate, to date, with the help of other people, over 200 specific examples of prophetically accurate scientific and world event related information. It's impossible what this man was able to publish, what he was told, and we have copyrights on. And that's why only a couple weeks after the investigator contacts me, another guy here in the States who's a retired prosecutor and trial lawyer contacts me and says, hey, I've gone over all of the scientific stuff in your Billy Meier case, and I'm going to tell you, this is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, preponderance of evidence. Your scientific research, it's courtroom quality stuff. This is real. There's no doubt. You could prove this. And what's funny about it is, if I go back 5 years, I was in Las Vegas at a UFO event. I had a table there with my films and books and stuff. And a kind of late middle-aged guy comes by. He's looking down at the stuff. His arms are crossed. He's shaking his head no from left to right. So I said to him, excuse me, can I help you? Yeah. Guy says, I'm interested in this UFO stuff, but this Billy Meier, this can't be true. So I said to him, well, sir, what do you do? What's your background? He says, I'm a retired judge. I said, really? I said, Your Honor, could I step into your courtroom? And the guy was just cool. He was like right with it. Yep, step right in. How can I help you? So I said, Your Honor, if I tell you that NASA's claim that they're the first to discover that the contraction of the planet Mercury's outer layer, the shell, the skin of the planet, the reason it contracts is because of the metal core of the planet. If I tell you that that isn't true, it's that my friend in Switzerland discovered that first, would I have to prove that to you? And he said, well, of course you'd have to prove it. So I grabbed a book that just happened to be on the table, and I said, Your Honor, do you see the copyright date? He says, yes, I do. And I went farther into it, and I say, did you see the date here at this conversation? Yes. Do you see where this man, Billy Meier, says, I've always wondered, what's the reason for the contraction of the surface of the planet Mercury? And the alleged extraterrestrial woman, Semyaze, says, well, that's easy. It's because of the core of the planet, the metal core. Your Honor, in your courtroom, who wins? And he kind of steps back a little bit, squints at me, and he looks down and he says, you do. how much is this film, and how about that book? And it was like, that was pivotal, because this was like my two recent, people who recently endorsed. This is somebody with experience in what evidence is and what it takes to make it conform to a legal, let alone scientific standard of proof. Mm-hmm. Not one of the people in the UFO community that claim to be contactees, that claim to be abductees, experiencers, channels, not one of them has one piece of evidence that would pass muster in a court of law. They might as well at this point, and I mean literally, close down the UFO community and get busy with the task at hand, because what's coming to our world, what's already showing itself now, is only the beginning of what is going to change life as we know it. And that the reason for that is because we didn't change when we could have changed. So I know I kind of make long-winded answers, but I want you to know the depth of what's in this material.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, for our listeners, Michael's referring to the Billy Meier contact notes, which a lot of them have been translated from German into English, and they're available online. Anybody can go and read them. They're all dated, and all these predictions and everything are all listed in there. And I've read a lot of these. These are basically conversations that Billy had with Polarians. I think there was about 3 or 4 different Polarians throughout the years that he had conversations with, which he's written out these notes. Is he still in contact with the Polarians?
Yes, friends. He is still meeting with them, and the contacts are still being translated. They're linked from my website. They are still answering questions on almost anything you could imagine, to varying degrees. Some things they're not allowed to talk about. Some things they can only give a small amount of information. And other things they're just telling as much as they're allowed to, and it can be quite a bit. So this is still ongoing. He has met to date, not only with the Plejaren, but with I think the number's over 45 in total, extraterrestrials from either their race or other races that work with them. So this is monumental. This is going on Earth right now, just a few hundred miles from where you guys are based. I'm assuming you're in the UK. I could be wrong.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, we're both in the UK, yeah.
All right. So, I've gone to Switzerland 18 times since 2000 to interview, to film, to question, to examine, to look around, and to talk to other eyewitnesses, other people who were photographers, who were witnesses to assassination attempts on Billy. This is real. And when you just referred a little while ago to the millennials not understanding about processing film, I hate to say this, I've got to put most people who are only in the, let's say in the 20s, they don't even understand the difference between the garbage online and reality. Really. And it's time, folks. You're going to have to learn the difference, because things are coming, whether you're ready for it or not. Just like those hurricanes, and just like these earthquakes, and the coming eruptions in Italy. This was told to Meier back in 1948, and we have the documents on my blog. And they told him so much stuff, including in 46 he was already warned about Angela Merkel and her crazy thing to open the floodgates to people who would be high percentages of criminals and terrorists, and that was warned about 70 years ago. So in 1948, Meier is told, after 2015 and 2017, there will be earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that are going to be unprecedented. And one of the things specifically mentioned, and which also got mentioned in other documents a little bit of his from the 80s, there will be these earthquakes and volcanic eruptions in central Italy, which are going to result in such a forceful bit of upheaval that the great caldera, which is Campi Flegrei in Italy, is also going to erupt and open. Parts of Italy will be going into the sea in your lifetime. Then in Northern Europe, Northern Germany to be precise, there's something called the Eifel, EIFEL fields. That's an area where there's a huge caldera. That will erupt, and Northern Europe in that area will become, according to Meier's contact teacher, a sea of fire. And then we get it here with Yellowstone, which will effectively obliterate a large part of this country. I mean, these are things that you no longer have to rely on the prophecies from an extraterrestrial, because the earthquakes are already now underway in central Italy, and the rumblings at those volcanoes have taken place. The Vatican will be destroyed ultimately when Vesuvius erupts. And we had people that were attacking Meier. Oh, Vesuvius, that can't affect Rome because Vesuvius is near Naples. And then just a few years ago, scientists discovered that the magma chambers for Vesuvius extend under Rome. So everywhere that Meier has had scientific related prophecies or predictions, sooner or later, they're being corroborated by our supposedly new discoveries. This isn't to scare people. It's that we might, in our interview today, if we plant some seeds and people start looking and doing their research, and then over time, they will notice things because they are going to happen with certainty. They may want to start to revisit this material to figure out, well, what do we do about all this? I mean, we can discuss that in this interview as well. But this is, they tried to warn us so that we could change course enough so that certain things either wouldn't happen or could be averted somewhat. It's no longer possible. It's only possible now that people can learn what they were trying to teach us for their own personal benefit and to link up with other people of like mind to navigate the coming times. Our governments, our so-called leaders, most of whom are psychopaths, lunatics, are useless for true positive change. It will not happen. The only real leadership now comes from the ground up, and that's what we have to face.
Right. I agree. You said that you visited Billy Meier about 18 times in Switzerland. Have you had any contact with the Polarians or any other race while you were there?
No.
Or any other time?
I'll tell you what has happened. Okay. In my life, I've had 7 or 8 sightings of craft. Only 2 or 3 of those sightings do I suspect were real. One, of ET. One I know because I was within 20 feet of a small monitoring craft. I was living in the mountains of Brazil in 2011, and I had this, it was about a 20-second long encounter with this little monitoring craft at about 10 at night. I paid very close attention. I was watching this thing. And a week later, I was in Switzerland, and Billy confirmed, yeah, that's one of the monitoring craft. And these kind of craft are seen a lot in Switzerland, but I saw it in the mountains of Brazil. Okay. I have received information from the Plejaren through Meier on 2 or 3 occasions. And in 2009, which was the first occasion, what happened was there is a skeptic attacker named Cal Korff, who's a fellow who's been, trying to debunk the Meier case for years. He's not particularly mentally healthy, but nonetheless, I've encountered him, I debated him on radio. And then in 2009, he contacts me through email. Listen, we have different views here. Why don't we do a joint project with DVDs? Michael, you can do the pro-Meier, I'll do the opposing view, and we'll package it up and we both can promote them. And I said, well, okay, fine, fair enough, whatever you like, because I don't take this personally in a negative way because, it doesn't pay to take much of anything in life too personally. There might be something, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. So I agree, and we're back and forth with email. He had a website that was very hostile to us. Suddenly he's transformed it into, we're going to do this wonderful project, blah, blah, blah. So in about the second week of November 2009, I decided to send an email to Meier, to his English-speaking friend there. Hey, I'm going to do this project with Cal Korff. Anything you guys want to say about that? I get a response right away. No, do what you want to do. It's what you do. And I said, fine. The next day, I got another email. It said, on second thought, would you just wait? Because we have some information from you. So then the day after that, I get a transcript and an explanation, which is Billy thought about this and he thought maybe he would ask the play Aaron to look into the situation to see if there was something he, should know about this. And they did look into it. And the transcript, and I have this on my website as well, one of the other play Aaron, a woman named Florina, who works with, the leader of their race is called Ptah, and she and Ptah, co-join efforts at times, coordinate with Billy about things. So she came to Billy with an answer. And basically they said, well, Billy, we would like you to tell Michael Horn that he doesn't quite know the whole story here, and he's walking into a trap, and that Cal Korff wants to set this up to promote a lot of negative stuff to attack the case, and Michael would end up being a promoter of this negative stuff, not realizing how bad, Korff wants to, continue his attacks. We recommend that he doesn't do it, but it's up to him. So I got that message in the transcript, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, I don't really need to do this. I'm going to trust that they have a better insight. So over about a 2 or 3 day period, I was in touch with this Cal Korff guy, sending emails back and forth, and thank you, no, you do what you want, Cal. Why? Are you sure? What? Finally, when he got that I was not going to participate, his website changed from all, throwing tulips around in the fields and love and kisses, 300 attacks against Meier and me, including death threats. And it was so bad, this is how bad it was, that in 2009 and into 2010, I sent information to the sequence of people that were hosting his site after I would complain. 3 different web hosting companies took his site down because it was so virulent. And finally, another American one put it up, and I thought, okay, that's fine. Who cares? At least I'll keep my eye on him. But I did not know this. Even Billy didn't know what was involved. So they forwarded the information. And it wasn't just to do me a favor, because as they said, this is going to harm all this work. It'll harm Billy. It'll harm you and all this. There's no upside that we can see to your going ahead with it. I thought, well, I can take a hint. So the only other specific information sent, for me was on a personal issue. But again, it wasn't like, you're a special person here, we're going to send you information. It was because I was involved in something else that wasn't directly related to the case, but it was going to take all of my time and energy and emotional energy to deal with it for some time. And what they were basically saying was, we suggest you settle this issue. Here's a way you could do it so everybody, can just move on in their lives. And then I realized, because I had 2 more films that I needed to make. And so I took the advice and was able to go ahead and do my work. And I haven't heard, I'm not going to hear anything more from them. They did make some comments to Billy about my work. It was very nice what they said, and it's in their contact. But that's great. And I keep on doing what I do just to do what I love doing. So that's really it.
Right. Do you know this? Is there a specific reason why the Belerians chose Billy Meier? And are there any other people that the Belerians are in contact with other than Billy?
Okay, let's answer the second part first. And the answer to that is no. They needed one person who could be strong enough and honest and full of character, who would bring forward the information that was necessary for us the way it exists. Some of it originates with them. Some of it originates thousands of years ago. Some of it originates countless millions of years ago. And we can get into that. So Billy was chosen. There were a total of about 6 people who could have potentially done this gig. But Meier was always going to be the most likely candidate. And other people, when there was some kind of impulsing towards them for this, they were declining it. Some people died, etc. The reason Meier was kind of really the shoe-in is because, and I'm going to qualify this and say this, according to the information in the case. And I say that with certain things where I have no way of proving or disproving what is said. It's simply what is said in the case. People can take it or throw it out with the bathwater. Here's what's said. That the reality of life is that every human being on Earth and any and everywhere else throughout the universe where human life may exist has a human spirit. And the spirit is like a little hologram, a piece of the universal consciousness itself. That it isn't about imaginary gods and deities and saviors and saints. Those don't really exist. What they refer to when we say the spirit or the universe, they're saying we call it the creation because we live in the consciousness, in the body of the creation, which is the source of all life in itself, this universe. And in terms of human beings, every human being has this little piece, the human spirit. And it's designed and intended to evolve over countless billions of years through countless hundreds of thousands and millions of different reincarnations of the spirit, different personalities that incarnate, to evolve, to remerge with the creation, with this universal consciousness. Okay, so the next thing that they're saying is, now that there's a human spirit involved here, and this is different from what we call the soul, which is really just the psyche of the human being, it isn't eternal and immortal. There's no group souls. Souls don't travel. The psyche in each lifetime is connected to the personality, and at death, that all dissolves, and that's all absorbed as information and energy by the spirit, and it's retained and stored in certain ways. But we are never the same person ever again. We are always an evolving level for the spirit and for a new personality. That being said, again, that the spirit that enlivens the person known today as Billy Edward Albert Meier is an enormously ancient spirit that actually had long ago gone through all of the evolution and entered into what we would call the lower levels of the high spiritual planes, just gone into the spiritual planes, but then came back to do evolution again for the purpose of helping people in different worlds straighten out. Now that's it's a lot to throw at people, and my gosh, don't worry about that part. Let's bring it into a little more relatable and still controversial perspective. It is said that the spirit that enlivens Billy Edward Albert Meier is the same spirit that also enlivened other contactee / prophets of the past, and I'll name them. Enoch.
Michael, we're just going to go to a commercial break, so we'll carry on after the break, okay?
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
and welcome back to the Divine Truth on Revolution Radio. Before we continue with the show, I just need to remind you that Revolution Radio is a listener-supported station. We do rely on your donations to keep us on air, so please do go to freedomslips.com and make a donation if you can. Just click on the Support Us section where you can make a one-off donation. You can also join our monthly support club, where you can make a monthly donation starting at only $10, or you can buy one of our seed packs starting at only $60. All of our seed packs contain non-GMO, non-hybrid heirloom seeds. You can also purchase the Revolution Radio archive, where you can download not just my show, but all of the Revolution Radio host shows. Now we'll continue with the show. Hopefully we still have our guest on. Michael Horn, are you there?
Yes, indeed.
And my co-host Nyssa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
But Michael, before the commercial break, you were explaining why Billy Meier was chosen. Could you continue with the? Yeah,
Sure.
Can you continue where you left off there?
Yes, I was saying that there had been some other contactee/prophets in our historical past who were connected as well to the Pleiaren, the forefathers of the current day Pleiaren, who are the contact people and mentors and even students of Billy Meier. So I had also said that Meier's spirit form, the spirit that is within him, is extremely ancient, and that it had already done evolution once, which means billions and billions of years, and in a unique way came back to the material universe to act as a contactee and prophet for people on different worlds. But this is the one where we are currently involved and where this activity is going on. So Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Emmanuel, Jeremiah. Let's go Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Those are four names that we know as, quote unquote, biblical prophets. Then we come to the fifth name, Emmanuel, which very few people know. And then there's Muhammad, and then there's Billy. So let me explain. Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, and Jeremiah, they all had the same evolving spirit form. So Enoch lives, and he's the contact person, and the information is given to him at the time for the people. And let's remember that up until this time, historically, in the last couple of hundred years, people couldn't read and write all over the world. It was limited to a relatively small number of people. Certainly in the time of the biblical prophets, Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and then Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is the real name of the real man who has been given a false identity as an imaginary person named Jesus Christ, who never existed, never walked on the face of the earth, let alone on water, and for whom there is zero historical record. Now, people are free to believe whatever they want, and religions and saviors, but in terms of a factual level, there is no record of any human being named Jesus Christ. Now, that's pretty weird, considering that is arguably the name of the seemingly most important and influential human being who's ever lived. Then we have Muhammad. Well, we're told he was a terrible guy, but according to the information in this case, he was also a true prophet and contactee. His mission was to also bring forward the spiritual teaching, which nonetheless got corrupted into a holy book that's called the Quran, as the truth got corrupted into the Old Testament and got corrupted into the New Testament. Now, let me just say, I full well know that a lot of people won't like that information, or they may feel offended or whatever. Okay, it's nothing personal. It's what's in the case, and you can do with it what you will. So Meier, Billy Meier, is the seventh and final contactee prophet for planet Earth, according to this information. Now, that doesn't make it a celebrity gig, because if you know from the history with other prophets, certainly they were attacked and vilified and hounded, and in one case, one of them got nailed up, although he survived the crucifixion. It's more, controversial info. Muhammad was a pretty radical sword swinger, but he never married 9-year-old girls. He was a liberator of women in the truth, but it all got rewritten by his cousin and I think it was Omar and the various caliphs and all. So in order for humanity to not completely destroy itself, because of these religions and politics in our world, a seventh and final prophet was determined to appear during this electronic age, when people around the world could read and write, so that the information, the material, the evidence would be available from this point on and not changed into a cult, a religion, a belief system with yet another savior and God and all the rest of it. As I say, some people will have trouble with that, but we are only concerned with finding the truth. We're not really concerned certainly with attacking people. We just want to know what the truth is. Here's the information from the Plejaren and Meier. Then we get to do with it whatever we wish to study and try to test it.
Okay. This goes into nicely leads into another topic I wanted to talk about. Is like how does Billy know the real name of Jesus Christ? And this goes into when he met the Plejarians and was taken back to meet Jesus, and he went to other times as well.
Sure.
Do you want to explain how that happened? When did that happen for a start?
Absolutely.
And how that happened, how that event happened.
Yes, I believe it was in 1953 in our time. Meier was being tutored by the extraterrestrial woman Asket. He was about 16 years of age. And they had talked about certain trips into the past. And there were also trips into the future, but we'll leave that alone for the moment. Trips into the past that she would take him on so that he could see and know the truth about things in our history that were very important and that were very different than what we had come to learn from our history and certainly from our religions. So the most famous of these events was his being taken, again, allegedly, back in time, along with another man who happened to come upon Meier and Asket when they were camped in the Jordanian desert, 1953, prior to this time travel trip. This was a Russian guy who was kind of an adventurer who came upon them accidentally, and the fact that he had, and they talked to him, and he was very curious and interested in what was going on, and they gave him the opportunity, which he took, to go on 2 different time travel trips with them, which blew his mind pretty much, and he had to keep it secret until his death. He died when he was a bit over 90, and he never went public with it. But here's what happened. Meier and this man and Asket are transported back to around 32 AD, prior to the crucifixion. And in a nutshell here, and there are transcripts that are linked from my website, Meier gets a chance to have a conversation with this man whose name was Emmanuel. And in this conversation, Meier even says, in our time, you've been come to be known by another name. And he says, yes, I know that will happen. Remember, Emmanuel is a contact person as well for the Plejaren. And he says, yes, I unfortunately, I know what will happen in my name. It's going to be a very long and sad period of time when much terrible, activity will come upon the earth because of people, because of their irrationality, because of the way false teachings and false, information about me will be, I'll be turned into some kind of a son of a deity, which I am not. And it will bring much bloodshed upon the earth. And it's unfortunate. And it won't be until your own time, he's talking to young Edward Albert Meier, that through your mission, things will eventually get straightened out. But it will be bad. And I even know that the things I'm facing, a crucifixion, will be very difficult for me. But it's my destiny, and I must walk that path. As I said, he does survive it, and there's more information about that. But here's where it gets even, I think, if we can say, more interesting. Because young Meier has this experience in 1953, It is some years later, it's around 1963 then or so, that he, as I think at that point he's about 21 years old, and he is an adult now, and he is in Israel. He's in the outskirts of Jerusalem, the old city, with an ex-Greek Orthodox priest. The reason they are together is this ex-Greek Orthodox priest has been unconsciously to him, he's been telepathically led to this interesting little hillside. Now, Meier is told way back in 32 AD about certain things that will happen in the future he should be prepared for. So in 1963, they go together to look at this hillside, and there's a kind of a hole at the base of it, and Meier takes his flashlight, looks in, they start to dig and enlarge the hole so that they can both get through it. What they end up entering is not a hill so much as an ancient tomb with stones on the floor, large pieces of stone. And they go about upturning the stones because Meier knew there were things that would be buried there for him to discover.
Okay.
And what he finds there is resin encrusted, animal skin wrapped scrolls, like sheaths of a material, perhaps a parchment, upon which there's a bunch of writing in Aramaic. Now, it just so happens that this ex-Greek Orthodox priest named Issa Rashid can read and write Aramaic. He also can speak German. So it's no accident that he has kind of been drawn into this. The materials are turned over to him by Meier, who asks him to please translate it into German and send him the translations, which he does with about 1/3 of this document before he and his family, along with the scrolls, have to flee Jerusalem because, as he writes to Meier, certain powerful people have found out I have something of interest and they're coming after me. He leaves and they go into a refugee village in Lebanon. He hides the scrolls in a wall there. And within 1 week of his entering that village with his family and the scrolls, the Israelis bomb that village. And it's even in newspaper articles. For some reason, they come and they bomb that village. He and his family escape with their lives, and the scrolls are lost. And it is found out that maybe 4 years later, when they had already migrated into Iraq, that this man, Issa Rashid, and his family were machine gunned to death, ostensibly by the Mossad. Mm-hmm. So Meier now has, back in about 1974, 78, he's got the first translation of what comes to be known as the Talmund Emmanuel. And he publishes it in German. Then there's the first English translation of this in 1990 or so, which attracts the attention of a professor up at Oregon State University who is a meteorologist and also a student of comparative religions. He hears about this. He gets the book and says, aha, another Bible hoax. I'm going to debunk it. He spends a year and a half going through it. Then he publishes his own book called Celestial Teachings. And that's Professor James Deardorff, the late Professor Deardorff, who publishes a book and essentially says, this Talmud Emmanuel is the original teaching upon which the book of Matthew is based, not the other way around. It's not a falsification, and it resolves hundreds of inconsistencies in the book of Matthew. Well, it goes on from there, and I'll give you the last shoe to drop. They could only translate the book to a certain degree at that time. And then the Play-Aaron came forward a few years ago with Meier and said, look, there are inaccuracies in here, which it is now time that they be properly translated. And Meier says, well, why didn't we do this before? And they said, if we had allowed this thing to be fully accurately translated, you would have been killed for sure by various people, secret organizations with religions, whatever. But now it is safe for you to do it. And so we now have the new translation, which is rather thick, amazing book of the Talmud Emmanuel with tons of information that was not known at the time that the Bible was put together, it was excluded or eliminated and never made its way in, and even isn't in the early translations of the Talmud. There are things in there such as the fact that Emmanuel had 17 female disciples, more female disciples than males. How he did his healings when he did healings, when it wasn't just some myth created about him. And how the kind of skills he used to heal, which had nothing to do with raising the dead, which can't be done, and magic, it had to do with great perceptive abilities on his part, with the fact that he was a master herbalist, very practical things. The whole thing about his walking on water gets explained because that never happened. And just so much interesting information about the times and the people and this man that the Playaran and Meier supported the translation with. So this, I sell and ship all over the world, along with a free CD that has what's called the Salome Peace Meditation, which is another thing that was brought to us by the Playaran to help us bring peace to our world, since we are so skilled at making war. And this is this whole thing, guys, this is the beauty of this. This case is less about UFOs and ETs and even prophecies than it is about what's called the spiritual teaching. And that is a non-religious, belief-free, absent of any superstitions and rituals, teaching and instruction for humanity. Same teaching that was first brought to Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad, but that the people of the time couldn't understand, that got falsified by the few people who could read and write and wanted to create religions. So that's a little bit of a long story, but that's why Billy Meier, and that's who Billy Meier is, and that's how it's all connected.
Yeah, I've read the English translation of the Talmund Emmanuel and all of the comparisons of all the paragraphs and the original ones from the Talmud and the ones that are in the book of Matthew, and
Right.
He goes through each one of them and says this, the one that's in the Bible is based on the Talmud, not the other way around.
Right.
And he goes through hundreds of paragraphs, and it's the same for every paragraph, and you can see the alterations that have been made, in the book of Matthew. And I believe these were actually written because Jesus couldn't, Emmanuel couldn't read or write. They were done by, I think it was Judas, or they were written by Judas, who could read and write in Aramaic. And they were left there for Billy Meier to find, basically. He was told where to find it, and he had to go and find it. And unfortunately, a lot of it wasn't translated because, to explain, the person was killed who was doing the translation. So we only have like a partial translation of the book of Matthew, because we can't. The rest have been taken by Mossad, and who knows where the rest of those manuscripts are now.
It was burned up in the bombing. Did you read the new edition that just came out in the past 6 months, or
no? This was a few years ago. I read it a few years. It's probably the older one. Yeah.
It's older, but I mean, you're still going to get a lot of the idea from that one. This one is pretty magnificent because it fleshes out everything. And we, as you learned in that edition, I think you may have learned that Emmanuel, after the crucifixion, what happened is they knew the crucifixion was coming, and healers had been brought in from India. Emmanuel had spent time in India. Remember the so-called missing years of Jesus, quote unquote?
Yeah.
Well, he had been taken by Gabriel into the Himalayas and into India, where there were advanced meditation masters who also there were, some of the true teaching scrolls and things were also still preserved in monasteries in Tibet and in India. He was taught very deep levels of meditation to control his body, his bodily function, so that when the time came, he could appear prematurely dead to his, captors at the crucifixion, and could be taken down in time so that he could be revived. The healers came in through the back entrance to the tomb. There's a film online for free called The Silent Revolution of Truth. We show the drawings and photographs we show the photograph of where the tomb was, and we show the drawings of how there was a rear entrance and all this stuff. This will ultimately, over hundreds of years, people will come to know the truth about this.
Yes, I believe so as well. Do you know what other times did he visit other than the time of Jesus? Can you go through just a few of the other events that he viewed?
Sure. He and the same, Russian traveler, vagabond guy, were taken by Esquet also into, I think it was 14th century France in the 1300s, and they were taken to a remote countryside area where a guy who I think was some kind of a rabbi, actually, and regarded as a strange guy and magician and all by the superstitious population. He lives there, and I think it may have been that Esquet may have visited him once before, but she takes them to visit this man. And, they have translation devices. So when they're speaking in their language, the other person's hearing their language and vice versa. This is how people were able to communicate during these weird trips. So they teach him a little bit about electricity vis-a-vis like a flashlight or lantern, battery operated lantern, which they leave him, this guy, and show him how to hook it up to his door knocker, because he has a metal door knocker. And the people in the village would sometimes come and they grab the door knocker and bang on his door and stuff and, try to annoy him. And they talk about the meeting with him, and it's very interesting. And also what's super interesting is how Meier describes the atmosphere there at the time, the air, how clear and clean and oxygen rich the air is. The sky is very blue. The birds and insects and animals are abundant. And somebody years after this finds a rare book somewhere in a bookstore. And in the book, the story was told about some historian discovered information about this guy back in 14th century France, who was regarded as kind of a bit of a wizard or something, and how the people had come to grab his door knocker and they were thrown back by some invisible force that they thought was the devil. I mean, they were describing what happened that Meier had already experienced in another time. Now, and again, people, this isn't stuff we tell anybody to believe, because you have to say, look, I can't prove that. Okay, there's a book that somebody found. Great. Do with it what you will, but I'll give you one that's a future event that we know about as information about this future event, but not the event yet itself. In 1978, Meier is now working with the Plejaren. Esquet was actually from a different race that works with the Plejaren. And that's when, in 1975, she hands off the contacts to the Semyaze, and as well to her father, Ptah, and Quetzal, and all these other people who are the Plejaren, like Svath was his first teacher. So Meier is having these meetings, and in 1978, the investigation has been started into the Meier contacts by an American, a retired Lieutenant Colonel, Wendell Stevens, an investigator for the U.S. Air Force who had already been investigating UFOs since the late 40s for the Air Force. Now, he has two friends, Lee and Britt Elders. All of them live in Arizona. I've known all these people, and I met them about 20 years ago or so. So these people are a team that goes to investigate. Now, unlike Wendell, who's very enthusiastic about UFOs and this new information and evidence, these people are very hardcore professional investigators and counter-espionage experts and all. They are, really high. They do Fortune 500 company, work for those companies and banks and what have you. So they're saying to Wendell, we're going to go with you, Wendell, because you might just be taken it for a ride here, and it won't be on a UFO. This sounds like a big hoax. So they go with Wendell. And in 1978, they're sitting in the kitchen in Switzerland at the center around a big table, which was like a big door that had been converted into a kitchen table since recently replaced. And Billy's talking to them about different things, and he talks about the San Francisco earthquake. And they say, oh, you mean the 1906 earthquake? He says, no, I don't mean that. They said, what are you talking about? He says, the one that's coming. They said, what are you talking? He said, okay, wait a minute. So just like earlier, remember in the conversation you brought up that, developing photographs, he goes out of the room into his office. He comes back with one of those famous little yellow Kodak envelopes. And he's got 11 photographs that he throws on the table. And they are going, what is this? So they start to pass the photos around. Fortunately, Wendell wrote about this in detail, and we have that information to this day. And basically what he said was, we're looking at photographs that are clearly of a real situation, not photographs of a painting, nothing drawn or artificial. And what we're looking at is the city of San Francisco. And it is clearly in some kind of a catastrophe because we see structures have fallen into each other. There is smoke, there's fire, cracked buildings. We're trying to figure out when this happens because Meier says to us, I can't tell you when this happens. It's against my directives. And so they're looking, and what Wendell then writes and publishes is the following. I'm going to paraphrase it. And he says, the cars that we were able to see on the streets didn't look anything like the cars of today, meaning 1978. They're generally rounder looking, more like the Beatles, cars, Volkswagen. And there's most of the windshields on these cars, they're much bigger than the windshields of today. They're higher. Some of them, the glass even goes into the roofs of these cars, which we also know exist today. And he said the other thing was, there's none of those outside side view mirrors, rear view mirrors. Now, this is 1978. Wendell Stevens is describing cars, whether they're Volkswagens or Prius or this or that. We also know now that Toyota and Tesla and Mercedes and other companies are ready to have completely mirrorless cars. The technology's been developed in Japan already. They're waiting for the laws to allow it. We already have the backup cameras in cars. The next step is the evolution where the rear view mirrors on the outside of the side, those side view rear view mirrors will be gone, and only cameras will show on screens inside our cars and vans and what have you what's behind us, so we won't have to look to the side. We can keep looking straight ahead and catch everything pretty much around the windshield and dashboard. Now, how would Billy Meier have taken photographs in 1978 of any city from above that's in catastrophe and destruction, and cars that don't look like the cars of the day, but then are described and look like the cars of today and the coming next few years? So we can say, based on this unusual information, San Francisco is indeed, as many people have assumed, it's going to have another earthquake, but it's going to be in the not too distant future. When cars are out on the streets without those side view mirrors out there, that's probably around the time you better start migrating out of San Francisco, unless you want to be, watching bricks fall in your head.
Yeah, that sounds like it'll probably happen within the next decade or so.
Yes, or possibly less. But I would say you're right. Within the next decade, I've often said, 5 to 7 years, 4 to 6 years, whatever, because we are moving along rather quickly. And that is, look, when I'm sure you guys have talked to people who talk about UFOs and time travel and all this stuff, and they've got all sorts of stories, and some people can be very convincing. None of them have photographs of anything. They have no scientific support. They have no real eyewitnesses or independent. They have nothing. And this is why I have, just relatively recently, when I start doing interviews and presentations, I'm saying to people, look, forget about UFOs and ETs. If you want the truth on that, you go to the Meier case and you can do what these experts now have done. You can examine, you can start with 1964. It's ironclad. It establishes the reality. that this man, Meier, was taking photographs of extraterrestrial craft and phenomenon generated by them in 1964. And there's eyewitnesses, credible people. And we have some of the same photographs still existed today. How could he have done, if you can't show where those photographs were available for him to march around the countryside in 1964, then it's over. The skeptical challenge is done. And it also sets the standard for proof of any other contacts. Well, that isn't going to happen. There is no more proof. And look, I wouldn't mind if there were people having contacts. Fine, it'd be wonderful, but there's no need for it because it hasn't been. See, remember in the very beginning, I said the biggest discovery would be extraterrestrial race, only exceeded by contact with it. And here's the third shoe to drop. There would have to be a reason for the contacts. People, intelligent beings, whatever you want to call it, aren't going to come for hundreds of light years in space to give us lights in the sky to chase. They're not doing it so I can have a career as a speaker about UFOs. There's a reason. And this reason is connected to the true history of this case, going back not just tens of thousands of years, but hundreds of thousands of years when you dig into it. And that's to help us assure our own clearly very threatened future survival and straighten ourselves out. There are things coming to your country as they're coming to mine and other countries that are going to be literally revolutionary, disrupting, and dangerous. And we need to become sober people, not captured by all the phenomenon and distraction and disinformation, because that leaves us helpless and hopeless. We won't know what to do. And that's why the spiritual teaching is the core of the case. The Talmund of Jammanuel that we're speaking about contains a big chunk of it. Several other books in English now from Meier contain it. Many documents online freely available contain it. And it's all about us learning how to think, take responsibility for ourselves, get the heck away from all these crazy religions and politics that try to control our lives and tell us that our real power lies outside of ourselves. So this is what it's about. And this is why it has survived every challenge. This is why none of the attackers can take down the truth. They've tried to kill Meier. They've tried to falsify things. They've tried to disrupt at every level. It won't work because this is truth. It doesn't belong only to anybody, one person. It's here for everyone. So that's why those of us who get irritated with all this UFO ET stuff, because we know that that's a distraction. There's no substance there. There may be nice people out there who think they've found, the all-important Rendlesham case or the Roswell case. Roswell was real. There's nothing left. Can't prove a thing. So there's no point in worrying our pretty little heads about it. Mm-hmm. We have something where the evidence, people can even test some of the photos themselves now online with technology that everybody's got, Photoshop. I mean, we have so much, we just lay it out there for people. So much is just free that you can use to determine the truth. And then when you start to see these people trying to attack with all these skeptical claims, you go, forget that. That's not going to get us anywhere. So that's a little more about it,
Yeah. I mean, the whole time travel thing interests me quite a lot because we had a guest on our show recently who claims to have been involved in a time travel project from the US government and teleportation technology that's being used and, all kinds of things, even visiting Mars and stuff like that. So I don't know if you want to comment on that as to whether...
Yes, it's fraud. That's a lie. And whether the person, I know the person, his initials may be AB or something like that. There's no such thing. If we had technologies of that level, If America had those technologies, they already would have enslaved everybody on the planet through comparable technologies. We do not possess that technology. No human being from Earth, with the exception of Meier, has ever set foot on Mars. And I did say that, yes. It did take Meier and showed him. He marched around Mount, what is it, Olympons or something like that, up there, Olympos. But again, that doesn't matter, Meier on Mars or not. Nobody from Earth, and none of these people, ask them to please provide the evidence. They'll give you a tall tale about security and secret things and, I'm lucky to be alive. No, they're liars, and I will tell it to their faces. So I don't just go on radio shows or anything and say something behind someone's back that I wouldn't say to their face. I have gone, the reason I don't get invited any longer to most UFO events is when I was being a presenter at the International UFO Congress, I did get up and called out people and said, these people are lying. This isn't true. They don't know what they're talking about. And boy, oh boy, they stopped inviting me really quickly because they want to have their parties. It's like, we want to have our little pretend world about UFOs and abductees and contactees. And no, you have no evidence, none of you, but it's a nice party. And, you're disturbed because, see, once any of those people, like an organization like MUFON would say, and they are one of the big obstacles, they are a disinformation organization. They suppress the Meier material deliberately. If they acknowledged it was real, they'd be out of business. They wouldn't be able to get all these people to run around chasing lights in the sky, which are military craft. And we know this from people who do have top secret clearances. And this is not going to sit well with a lot of people. But I don't care. These people need to get out of the way with their lies. Mr. A.B. and the rest of them need to get out of it and reveal, if they had any integrity, to say, listen, I made it up, or I'm a brainwashed whatever. I thought it was real, but I can't prove it. So, sorry. And let people start to find out just how precarious the reality in this world for them is. There are some real conspiracies in the world. Not a lot of them, but there's a few. And some of the stuff that is not even conspiracy, but simply prophecy and prediction that is coming down, it's going to be brutal. And the best thing is to not be there when that stuff's occurring and to try to be with like-minded people who, not out of fear, but out of preference, come together to straighten their heads out, to move out of the way of things whenever it's possible to be somewhere else, but not to be hooked into this endless junk. This whole UFO, in 5 years, I'm going to predict it'll be dead. If people haven't already given up on this nonsense within the next year or two, it'll be dead because the world, people won't have time for this silliness, and they'll go back and they'll listen to some person talking about having gone to Mars or being a contactee, and they'll go, geez, why did I waste a minute on that stuff? It's hard to hear, folks, but the truth is often very harsh. It's not pretty, because we've gone astray.
So are you like aware of what level of technology we do actually have? Because I hear stories, the military are like 50 years ahead of us, ahead of what you can see in the public, 100 years ahead, 1,000 years ahead. They have anti-gravity craft and they have all this, hidden technology. How much of that is, actually real or true?
Well, according to the information in the case, as I like to say, it's reported that as far back as the 20s, there was already research and development for electromagnetic or anti-gravitic craft in process. Various governments, such as yours, mine, Russia, Canada, at the top levels of secret military already possess various kinds of alternative craft, none of which are true interplanetary. They couldn't go to Mars. They're not equipped for that, but they are alternative in some case, anti-gravity and what have you. I have a friend who's a former Navy SEAL. Back as far as 1990, he had laptop computer type things and weapons. He says, people know nothing about, because the best technology is first given, obtained, appropriated, or developed by or for the military, not for the citizens. More money and black projects, funnel money to develop terrible weapons HARP is a terrible, terrible weapon which has already been super destructive to degrees that cannot be remedied even for millennia on Earth, if ever. So some of these stories about these technological developments in weapons are real and true. Basically, an organization like MUFON has an arrangement with the State Department in the US and the CIA to send them the best photographic evidence that people come up with, because what all these nice field investigators are really doing is research for the military. They don't know it because they're out there spotting various tests of military craft, and they report or they take photos if they can, or films. And so all this stuff gets funneled to the, secret governmental type of, levels for research for these developments with the companies that do this type of stuff, so they can keep perfecting things like veiling of craft or phenomenon that they want to appear. It is so manipulated out there. And it's like, I'm not the only person that can tell you this stuff, but the PLAYRN have made it clear. There's, for instance, a guy here in America, James Gilliland, E.C. SETI or E-SETI or something like that. So he claims to be an extraterrestrial contactee with regular visits from extraterrestrial craft up at Mount Adams in Washington. In 2004, he approached me in San Francisco at an event with one of his videotapes. Oh, you're Michael Horn. Will you bring this to Billy Meier so he can, tell me more about the craft we're seeing? I said, okay. I bring it to Billy, and I'm expecting that maybe within, a month or something, when I'm back in the States, he's going to tell me what it is. Within 4 days while I'm there, he calls me into the office. He says, last night, I showed this video to Ptah, the leader of the PLAYRN race. And here is what he said. What these people are seeing and filming in Washington State are not anything extraterrestrial. They are secret U.S. military craft developed at Area 51. This man, James Gilliland, is in contact with nobody or nothing, certainly not extraterrestrials. And he's, kind of been deluded and has some mental problems now. Well, Gilliland, when I came back, I told him in as nice a way I could that this isn't ET stuff. Well, he then started to attack the Meier case, Meier and me and all. He still goes crazy about it. There's no ETs performing on demand, like with Stephen Greer, contact in the desert and flashlight. No, you don't have aliens on demand. If you shine your flashlight in the sky at night in the desert, they're going to show up for you. Ain't happening. Such massive manipulation and disinformation. There still could be a fake ET attack, certainly here in America, to get everybody under martial law control. This is not extraterrestrial stuff, folks. There's no ETs, carrying their lunch trays around under, the sands at Area 51 working for the government. They're not meeting in the White House. This stuff is silliness. It's just like, let's stop being so gullible. Real life is showing us that the world has some serious, real problems, and they're not caused by ETs, and they're not going to be cured by ETs. It's up to us.
Mm-hmm. It's just a quick question, just for my own curiosity. Did we land on the moon?
In 1958, Billy Meier published about 162 statements that were prophetic for the future. And I mean, in there was stuff like, in the future, there will be 2 U.S.-Iraq Gulf Wars, the second war led by a president who will be the son of a former president. I mean, nailing stuff decades before it happens. He names AIDS as a coming epidemic by name. Plastic credit cards, portable phones, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And he says in 1958, in the future, there will be, I think he says, 6 moon landings by the United States. The first one will be a complete hoax to fool the world, and the others will take place. They will be able to put, their man on the moon, have a landing and come back. But the first one will be a hoax. And they, in one of the transcripts later, this is 58, later on, they explain what was done, how it was done, that the astronauts themselves were subjected to deep hypnosis and drugs and were mind controlled. 37 people in total were involved in the hoax. That included everybody involved in the filming, the hypnotists, the astronauts and all of you know, they all believe they were there, except what you do see then during like a press conference when they're asked questions, and people have pointed this out, their faces go really weird because it's kind of like they have this answer, but there's something about it they don't know, but they supposedly know. And there was visible confusion in the faces of some of them. And yes, while many people have said it's a hoax, the Plejaren explained to Meier stuff about it and how they ultimately, with Apollo 13, put these artifacts that were supposedly Apollo 11, they put them on the moon so that in future times, if other nations got there, they'd be able to see the so-called original things. But this was filmed on Earth, and it was a fraud, a complete hoax, and just about everybody connected to it is dead. There were people who were connected to it, who were eliminated so that they could not say anything, and the others, who had been highly controlled through, drugs and hypnosis and what have you. This is, these are the lengths that countries will go to try to manipulate, to try to gain advantage. And unfortunately, they also long ago foretold that our country and the EU, first of all, Meier in 1958 foretold the EU and that they would be involved in all these efforts to biochip people along with America, which are now underway. But they also told him that America is going to provoke and push for war with Russia. It's not the other way around. Russia's not looking for war with the West. America, the West through the EU and all that, they're going to push for war. And that's not going to come out real well for us. And what they've basically described is that my country will ultimately be utterly and completely obliterated from one coast to the other. And they describe how it goes down if we go ahead and do this crazy push for war. Hillary Clinton, had she been elected our president, she would have put the country into a nuclear war with Russia, and that would have been it. At that point, we'd be done. There are people around Trump. Trump, if there's anything good that could be said for Trump and his policies, he didn't want war. He's trying to make, do deals and business with Russia. Much better than trying to have war with them, because it's not in the cards. We do not win. No matter what our insane intelligence and military leaders decide they're going to do to try to trick events and outsmart the prophecies, it will not go down that way.
Right.
Can I ask how close we are to the prophecies? How have we veered away from the danger, or are we going towards it quicker than predicted?
I'll answer this way. When people used to ask me, well, what do you do? Why do you do this? What's your purpose? For your own, I say, my own mission is to prove the prophecies wrong. And that means, and I would say to people, that requires that I can reach a lot of people who will wake up and will take the hints and will start to redirect their thinking and their feelings and their actions so that we go a different, better direction. The truth of the matter is that it did not happen. I was with Billy in Switzerland just a few months ago, 3 months ago or so, something like that, 3-4 months ago. And I had some questions I brought him, which they're posted up on my blog, questions and answers. And then I also saw, with those alone, we had some information as well from his teacher from years ago. And I said to Billy, on these questions and answers and on this stuff from Svath, how did he get that information? Was it from the spiritual levels? He says, no, he got it through time travel. And when I thought about that for a minute, I got very depressed. Why? Because when Svath published certain things, those were predictions, meaning through time travel, he went forward into the future from his time and saw those events, which included those eruptions I spoke about earlier, those earthquakes, the terrible mistake that Angela Merkel made in her psychopathic mentality to open the floodgates to Europe that will be impossible to close, really. The damage has been done. Even a couple of years ago, the Plejaren said there were already 17,471 ISIS sleepers now spread throughout Europe. There are, in America, almost something like 5,000 ISIS sleepers and 177,000 plus other lunatic terrorists who are lone wolves and all. This stuff is what's going to come now, according to this prophetic and predictive information, is worldwide upheaval. We're going to have 2 civil wars in America, which Meier foretold in 81 and 87. And you're going to have some really rough stuff over there as well. And in other countries, basically, France is going to fall to radical Islam. And we've had I've had these prophecies published since 2002 and on DVs since 2004. And that was at a time when there were no radical Islamists in France and attacking. So it's not good. But we have to be realists now. That's why I keep saying we've got to get away from this UFO industry stuff. It is mind rot. There's nothing there except more titillation. And I don't want people to become needlessly depressed and fearful. Look, I've been doing my thing publicly since 1987. So I've been at this for 30 years in the public, trying to tell people to look at this information. If people get upset now or they start to get a little worried, listen, folks, I've been trying. Maybe I didn't reach you before, or maybe you heard about it and thought it was a hoax. Now that it might be getting your attention, just start getting into it. Send me questions and challenges, whatever you want. I answer all my email. It takes me time, but I do. I'll tell you where you can find answers, where you can find more material. My website and my blog have hundreds, into the thousands of documents, transcripts, everything you could want. You could find out yourself if this is true or not. You don't have to, and we don't ask you to believe anything. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe Meier. We have professional analysis of evidence, and you can duplicate some of the analysis yourself now in the computer age. So we are now saying, yes.
Michael, we're going to finish like any minute now. Do you want to give out your website details?
Sure. My website is called theyfly.com. And I'll give an offer to any and all of your listeners. If they buy a DVD or if they buy a book, all they have to do is mention your show, your names, either one of your names in your show, and I will send them a free DVD in addition to whatever they order. So it's going to be a twofer. And I will tell you, some of the postage from the U.S. to overseas, costs more than the way the postage shows up, just because we can't calculate all postage initially. So I'm not tricking anybody with postage costs, but I will add an additional DVD worth at least $25 to any order where they just mention you or the show, and they go to theyfly.com. And from there, they can go to my blog and read. Now we have over 670 articles on the blog, new corroborations of the prophecies and predictions almost every week. Folks, I thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, well, that's the end of the show. I'll post details of the website and on the YouTube video in a couple of days when it goes on YouTube. But thank you again, Michael, for coming on the show. It's been great talking to you. Good evening, everyone.
Thank